Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box. And you cannot compare them at all, so don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table. Yeah. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table. Woo. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
What is going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast. We are with Camps to Canton now, so I got to start getting used to saying that. We are thrilled to be over there. Obviously, Matt and myself have been there for a while now, but we're finally bringing the podcast over. Dennis is coming with us. As I mentioned in my tweet earlier this week, you're going to see a couple changes coming from us, maybe a new intro, new logo. We're going to do a whole new transition coming over to the website. Do want to thank Ricky and the Music City Network and the Drive-In Podcast Network that we were with beforehand. They were amazing to us, and not that we wanted to leave them, but it looked like just easier for us to kind of keep everything smaller circles, I guess is the way to put it. It was just some different stuff going on for us. So thrilled to be joining them. I mean, again, I'm as a co-founder of the website, it's been fun doing that stuff. And we've had Matt over there for a little while helping us with our Dynasty content. So excited for that. We will be talking about the AFC East, though, today. Patriots and Jets on tap for today's episode. Before we get going, though, Matt, how are you doing on this beautiful Thursday?
Doing pretty good, bracing for the heat wave here. And, I think new logo, we talked the concept, probably a few tasteful nudes.
Yeah, sure, yeah. We were just talking beforehand how it's been, like, unseasonably nice here in Texas. And, I'm enjoying it. I don't know how, I think it's actually supposed to be hot next week. And then I'm on my way to Disney, so that'll be wonderful.
We're supposed to, they said usually on average our first 90-degree a day. And, this is where Dennis sold us short. He talked about in a post to somebody that we have redraft and dynasty cover. And between you and me, we cover Marvel and DC. I'm really upset that he also forgot to mention that we're a part-time weather podcast for the nation.
That is true. Very true.
They mentioned here usually the first 90-degree day comes like by around June 21st. It's supposed to be possibly Saturday. If not, next Wednesday is supposed to be 93, which you've been here. 93 here is like 120 in the California desert.
Yeah, and I will also say I was wrong. Of course, it's also supposed to rain here again for the next 10 effing days, and it has not stopped raining in Texas for like 2 months. But hey, the weather's like high 80s, or not even. It's like mid 80s all next week. So I guess in June I'll take that over 110. But it's like so bad here with the rain. It's ridiculous. My grass, I feel like I just cut it yesterday and already looks like a jungle outside again. It's frustrating. But
that's what happens during monsoon season here. You cut it and then it rains and it grows like 3 inches a day. I spent 2.5 hours because my wife's family was coming to stay with us, 2.5 hours doing the yard last week. I was looking at it today. I did it on Friday morning last week. It looks like it hasn't been done in a year.
Yep. Yeah, that is unfortunately where I'm at as well. Got to get a lot of stuff done as Mickey waits for nobody, and I do need to hurry up and get all of my stuff done so that the wife is not mad. I should just call her the wife. I hear that women don't like that. My beautiful, amazing, wonderful, incredible wife would be very mad at me if I don't get everything done that I need to before we go. So, New England Patriots. 2020, they finished 7-8 and in third place in the East. Their key additions, they added tight ends Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry, wide receiver Nelson Aguilar, wide receiver Kendrick Bourne, Matthew Judon, the outside linebacker, Kyle Van Noy, the linebacker, Davon,
Godchow,
the defensive end, and Jalen Mills, the safety. Key losses, Julian Edelman, who retired. Jason McCourty, the cornerback, went to the Dolphins. Joe Thuney went to the Kansas City Chiefs. The draft picks, they took Mac Jones in the first round, quarterback out of Alabama. Christian Barrymore, the defensive tackle, in the second. Ronnie Perkins, the defensive end, in the third, and Ramondre Stevenson, the running back, in the fourth round. The Patriots struggled in 2020 and went wild in free agency and the offseason. Are they greatly improved, though, Matt?
It was amazing last year to see the Patriots not even really in contention, didn't even make it back to 500, even in the Tom Brady era, the season that he missed with his ACL tear. Matt Castle had that team. I think they were 11-5 and just missed the playoffs because it was a numbers game. You know, the wheels really came off the dynasty bandwagon. I think we were all curious how it was going to work. Cam Newton probably wasn't the guy I would have naturally picked as a great fit with Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels, who I will give the courtesy of saying his name instead of he who shall not be named, even though I think that would be more accurate considering what he did to Denver. But Cam Newton never really looked the same last year. Didn't look like he was totally recovered. Didn't look like he totally fit. It was a strange COVID season, but the Patriots just seemed to be kind of in a funk. James White had that horrible tragedy with his parents, missed a chunk in the middle of the season. I know that took an emotional toll. Julian Edelman got hurt. They had so many people opt out. They were, you know, as we were heading into last season, it seemed like every day one or two Patriots were opting out, and you knew it was going to be tough. But this, I don't think I was prepared. I have not seen the Patriots probably in the last couple of decades on the kind of spending spree that we saw them going on. They were the major power players in free agency. They picked up some interesting pieces. I think their defense is going to be greatly improved. You know, they struggled defensively last year. They did suffer a couple of people retiring, a couple of people leave, but they've picked up a lot of pieces. I think it's going to be improved. The offense could be greatly improved. It was an interesting where they spent their money. It's interesting where they spent their draft picks. I don't know how you felt, but I was more than mildly surprised that they brought Cam Newton back. I thought that was kind of a one-year experiment that they were going to move on from. But they've said nice things about him. They did take Mac Jones. I expect we're going to see him at some point. I think the Patriots will be a better team in some ways. I think they still end up falling short of the playoffs.
Yeah, defensively, I always thought they were going to bounce back just because, as you mentioned, the injuries, the opt-outs, I think really hurt them. And I actually don't think their defense was as bad as maybe we think it was overall last year. I mean, when you have Cam Newton not doing much on the offense, some of the turnovers that they had, it kind of hurt your defense overall. The Cam Newton thing, I was kind of at first, but then when you heard Bill Belichick rarely goes out of his way to talk nice about players, and he did. He propped up Cam Newton, talked about how he'd love to have him back, and so I did think that meant something to him and to Cam Newton. I've been kind of defending Cam Newton at times, talking about, he joined the Patriots very late in the process last year, did get COVID. Josh McDaniels and Cam Newton. Now, Cam Newton, I think it's the I Am Athlete podcast is what it's called, where he talked about just like how difficult it is to learn that playbook for a whole season. And not to mention, he got, I think, weeks. I don't remember when. He did not sign much before the season kicked off. He did not get much time.
Late during preseason because a lot of people had started drafts, even redrafts, thinking Jarrett Stidham was going to be a steal.
Yeah. So I do think that he's got a chance to improve. Now, granted, I will say on top of that, his play overall was not inspiring. So maybe that is where a lot of people are fading him. But I think that he can be good enough for this offense to bring them over 500. Now, will they make the playoffs? That I don't know, because I don't love the team offensively they have around him. I don't, not sold on really any of the wide receivers, running backs. I like Harris a lot, but they've, again, same thing. They've got just a bunch of guys, in my opinion, in that backfield. The tight ends are great. When is Cam Newton
that was kind of the
Greg
problem
Olsen?
Last year. It wasn't just that Cam Newton didn't have a lot of time to adjust. The Patriots, I mean, that was arguably one of the reasons Brady struggled in his final season and was looking to move on. They had a not good set of weapons. I mean, I know they spent a first-round draft pick on N'Keal Harry. That didn't pan out. Spent a first-round draft pick, I believe, for Sony Michel. That hasn't exactly panned out. It's not that they haven't tried to make moves. Last year, they drafted 2 tight ends, and I would surprise it if either of them makes the roster this year. It never looked right. So Cam Newton, it's a little bit hard to know, did he fall off that much as a passer, or did he have no weapons, or is it a combination of both?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think not having any weapons played into it. And I, unfortunately, like we just talked about, don't really see much improvement there. I mean, again, I like Jonnu. I like Hunter Henry. But I don't see either one of those guys finishing as like a even wide receiver 2 when it comes to points at the tight end position. So it's the Patriots are an intriguing team. Maybe they just end up running the ball a ton and finding out a way to make the team relevant that way. You know, for you, we know they drafted not Cam Newton. They have Cam Newton. They drafted Mac Jones. So do you think Cam Newton is the answer full into 2021? Do you think he gets replaced? And if so, do either one of these quarterbacks take the Patriots to the playoffs?
I don't think the Patriots go to the playoffs in 2021. I feel pretty confident they're probably going to end up in that 8 to 10 win range and be on the periphery and just out. The question of when, I think Mac Jones will play at some point, whether it's due to an injury or whether it's due to them needing to make a change. Probably part of, I knew that Bill Belichick respected Cam Newton. Cam Newton respected Bill Belichick. Part of the reason I wondered, I was a little more of an eyebrow raise at them bringing back, because it seemed like a few times down the stretch they removed him because of performance, that they were not of the opinion that he was going to be able to do it. I think it's going to depend, when we see Mac Jones is going to depend on what he looks like in camp, how quickly he's able to pick up the offense, and where they are sitting in relation to the playoffs as you get into October and November. Because I think it's going to be tough for Belichick to see missing the playoffs 2 years in a row. They're going to do everything they possibly can to get in, and they have a chance. I personally just don't think they're going to make it. But if they're in the end of October and early November, and they're kind of on the fringe or looking on the outside looking in, and they're not getting a dynamic performance from Cam Newton, I think they will make a change.
Yeah, I do expect to see Mac Jones to play at some point in time this year as well. I hope, well, see, I really don't want to say I hope it's because of bad play either, because I don't want to see Cam Newton play bad, but I hope it's not because of injury. So I guess if Mac Jones ends up on the field, it's because Cam Newton is playing bad. I'm with you, and I think I just said a minute ago, I think they finish around 500. They can't finish 500 now because of the 17th game. So
around 500 to me is 8-9, 9-8, 10-7.
Yeah. So I do think that they'll finish better than that. I'm with you. I think we were just talking about it off air when we talked about, or maybe it was on the podcast. We were recording another episode just a little bit ago, and we talked about how loaded the AFC is. It is loaded, and I think that's part of the issues with the Patriots here. So fantasy finish, golly, we're already getting fantasy finishes and projections. You were right. This episode is going to go quick.
Well, also, technically, you're not wrong. They could finish at 500 if they went 8-8 and had a tie, or maybe 7-7 with 3 ties. You forget the tie could be the great equalizer here.
That is true. I still don't think the ties help them get into the playoffs, though. The AFC is, I mean, it was loaded last year, and I don't see many of these teams taking a step back. I mean, the AFC North is really good. I think the AFC West has a chance to be really good. AFC South, not so much. And the AFC East, I think the Bills are going to be. But
even in the South, you have a couple of teams. Colts and Titans were playoff teams last year. You wouldn't be shocked if both made it back.
Yeah. All right. So, again, fantasy finishes and projections already. 15 minutes into the show, and we're already at fantasy finishes and projections for the New England Patriots. Newton struggled in the passing, but his rushing helped him to QB 16 last year. How many games does he start for you in 2021 before we see Mac Jones take over? Cam Newton did finish, again, as QB 16, 2,657 passing yards with 8 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 592 rush yards, 12 touchdowns. Dennis said he thinks Cam starts, but Belichick knows Cam is a short-term solution. Mac will be getting playing time, possibly even taking over as the starter before the season is over.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly the case. The Patriots are one of the teams that have an incredibly late bye week. I believe they're one of the week 14 buys, if I remember correctly. So I mean, it's possible you get all the way to the bye week and make a change, but then you're talking about really throwing Mac Jones in as a Hail Mary with 3 games left, saying, hey, can you salvage our season? I tend to feel like it's going to be, if they're not where they want to be or they think they need a spark, it's going to be around Halloween.
Yeah. So let me see. I guess I could have done that while I was listening to you talk, pull up their schedule and see how that kicks off. Because I do think that if they start off the season poor again, I would say there's almost no way that he doesn't. Because I did see a quote from
you also have to think about what they're going to look like. So Halloween Day, they play at the Chargers. The following week, November, would be at the Panthers, then home for the Browns, at the Falcons, home for the Titans, at the Bills. So maybe, October 24th sits out there. It's kind of a fat date. You'd be at home against the Jets. Could end up two rookies. But I feel like a little bit of the beginning part of their season, they have the Dolphins to open. That's a little tougher. They go to the Jets, a winnable game. Saints is going to be tough. The Tom Brady homecoming is going to be tough. But then you're at the Texans, probably winnable. Home versus the Cowboys, potentially winnable. Jets, a potentially winnable game. At the Chargers, that one's a little tougher, but potentially winnable. And that's where they're around 500. They're hanging into the playoff picture. I don't know if they're super quick to make a change. But that October 24th against the Jets, I could see that being an easier place to slot him in. It's tough to make your first start on the road. That's the only thing that it looks like kind of when you get to Halloween and early November, they're on the road a couple of times. I wouldn't personally want Mac Jones' first start to be against the Browns, who I think are going to be a playoff team, but that's an early November game. So probably for me, you're looking somewhere between October 24th and November 7th if they don't do what they like.
Yeah, I actually would probably agree with you there. What do you think? So where do you think both these guys finished in fantasy? I feel like you can't really draft either, at least redraft.
Not
for
redraft
here. Yeah.
Yeah, when we finish doing our team previews, we're going to go through our 2021 rankings. So I have started to think about that and look at that. But the Patriots, I'm strongly considering as a team that I don't have a quarterback in the top 32. Which I think was the case last year because when we did the rankings, Newton wasn't on the team and I didn't have a great feeling about Stidham.
Yeah, I think Stidham was probably my last one with, unfortunately, Ryan Fitzpatrick, and that turned out to be way wrong because I did not expect him to be that good.
Kind of reminds me of the Bears situation last year where you thought Trubisky and Foles would both play and one of them would put up okay numbers, but it was hard to put anyone above maybe a spot 32.
All right, running back. We all know on this podcast who I love in this backfield, and that is Damian Harris. He was the runner while White was the receiver, and now Stevenson is in the mix and possibly Sony Michel. Who is the better fantasy finisher in the backfield? Do you trust anyone? Damian Harris finishes RB53 last year, 153 carries, 691 yards, 2 touchdowns, 5 receptions, 52 yards. James White, RB42, 35 carries for 121 yards, 2 touchdowns, 49 receptions, 375 yards, and 1 touchdown. Dennis did add, if I had to take a shot on a New England running back, Harris is the guy. 200 carries, 865 yards, 5 touchdowns seems reasonable. Puts him on the RB2-3 borderline.
I think James White finishes the highest because he's going to be the pass catching guy. And whether it's, Newton actually did use pass catching running backs because Burkhead and White kind of split the season last year. If we remember, White, the personal tragedy was out. Burkhead was actually in there, was pretty involved for a while. That's one of the reasons I think we saw James White fall off of that low-end RB2, high-end RB3 territory where he'd been. I think he bounces back into that place. They like his skill set. He fits that offense. Damian Harris, I don't disagree with Dennis's potential projection for carries and yardage. I think Sony Michel is kind of fading out of the picture. I just don't think Harris. We talked about Harris seems to be the guy between the 20s to run the ball, but he's not a big receiver. And when they get in the goal line, they were using Cam Newton. I think that's part of the reason they took Ramondre Stevenson. Is they're looking for bodies down there. They also have a couple of bigger tight end bodies so that they can throw down there. I just don't think Harris gets the touchdowns, which is what puts him in the RB3-4 territory.
Yeah, I think that when they brought Stevenson on, I think that's the biggest thing that possibly hurts Harris, because I think they'll use him as that goal line back, almost an a la LeGarrette Blount situation they used a couple years. Now, Blount did get a lot of carries as well, but I do think that that's going to hurt him. I was trying to pull it up because I want to say that I'm remembering this correctly. I want to say that, like, yards per carry, Damian Harris was one of the best in the NFL last year. Like, he was actually a very effective rusher. There was a game where he really kind of started going off in the it was a game I know because I needed him to, and then he ended up getting injured. He put up like 50 yards on just a couple carries in that game, and then ended up getting hurt. It may have been with a concussion or something. I can't quite remember, but ended up getting pulled out of that game. But I think I really want to say Harris is going to be the best one. I really do, but I think pass catching wise, I think you're right. James White with the receptions he's going to get, and then not getting the touchdowns if that doesn't happen for Harris, it's really going to hurt him. He's going to end up getting hurt in fantasy points, but not scoring touchdowns.
Yeah, Damian Harris was 13 in yards per carry. Now hold on, they have 1, 2. There were 2 quarterbacks in there, so 11th among running backs, 5 yards per carry.
I mean, that's not bad for as limited as he was in the injuries and not getting a lot of playing time early too. So Sony Michel is the interesting one because I don't think they cut him until I think this is the last year of his rookie contract. So I wonder if they just let him go after the contract. I would imagine that
they declined his 5th-year option, right?
Yeah. And I think if they cut him, it's not a massive cap hit, but they're one of those teams that doesn't have – I think they still have, I think, decent cap room, but not a lot after the spending spree that you mentioned they went on earlier. So I don't think they cut him. How involved will he be? I'm not really sure. I think it's mostly going to be – although I wouldn't be surprised if it's Harris, Michel, and White, and then Stevenson doesn't become a guy till next year. Maybe they kind of keep him in the background and then make him a major role player next year.
My first thought, though, it was the same as you when they took Stevenson, is they watched how they were like basically the Patriots were the most predictable team in the history of time when they got in close at the goal line last year. They didn't have anyone who they were going to throw to. They lined up in some kind of funky 3 or 4 tight end, 3 or 4 tackle set, and they suicided Cam Newton into the line. My first thought when they took Stevenson was they don't want to do that every time, because I actually think that hurt Newton too. That's a lot of punishment to be, just pile driven into a line. It worked a couple of times. It worked against him a couple of times. I think that was part of the impetus for getting a couple of big body tight ends, that you have an option to actually throw a short pass and to get another big body running back to pound into. Yeah.
So I feel like I did not answer the question. I am going to go Harris. I know Matt said White. I'm going to lean Harris. Maybe it's because I have so many shares of him, but I believe that he can be a very effective running back for them this year. The wide receiver group is, I think, interesting is a kind way to put it. So Aguilar, Bourne, Jacoby Myers, and N'Keal Harry. Are there any of those guys that you want to play or have on your team? Myers finishes wide receiver 53 last year, 59 receptions, 729 yards. Dennis added that with the addition of 2 pass-catching tight ends and 2 wide receivers, Myers will have to take a big step to improve his numbers. Marquise Brown was wide receiver 36 last season. The difference, Hollywood had an 8-0 advantage in touchdowns. Brown had 1 less catch and only 60 more yards than Myers. If you can add him for a 3rd rounder, I think he's a steal.
Yeah, that's if he retains his role. I was interested. The signing of Kendrick Bourne was kind of a little bit of a lower profile receiver to come in. Nelson Aguilar, a little bit of a lower profile receiver to come in. They didn't really add any receivers in the draft, which I thought they might do. I don't think N'Keal Harry is ever going to become anything.
I agree.
So I don't think I wouldn't be shocked if they don't have a single wide receiver who finishes in above a wide receiver 4.
Ooh, I was going to say 3. I think 1 gets to wide receiver 3 territory, but I wouldn't be surprised.
None did last year.
Yeah. Well, but we're also talking about we think Mac Jones takes over. What was that, about halfway is Halloween, roughly?
Yeah, Halloween.
So, halfway. I think they'll be a little bit more pass heavy just because I think at this point, I would say I think Mac Jones is probably a little bit of a better passer than Cam Newton. The shoulder injuries. Again, I don't know how much of that was injuries, not knowing the playbook, COVID that affected Cam Newton last year. We didn't quite look like the passer we've seen in the past. So I think Mac Jones could be a little bit of a better passer. So if that's the case, maybe one of those guys jumps up to wide receiver 3.
Who do you think finishes as their best receiver? I'm going to say Aguilar. I don't feel great about it, but I'm going to say
I want to lean Myers, but I think Aguilar too. I believe in what he did last year with the Raiders, and that's the one thing we've seen Cam can do. He can still sling the deep ball, and he was fairly good with it with the Panthers. Now, again, we didn't get to see it much last year. Demir Bird, I think, had some good games with the Patriots last year, but nothing that set the world on fire. And I think Aguilar is better than Demir Bird, so I think I'm with you. I think just based on him being able to possibly get those big plays and some touchdowns, it could end up being Aguilar.
And they're another team that's been rumored to get Julio Jones. And if they did that, it would change my perception of probably the Patriots for the season and their pass receivers, because Julio Jones isn't going to finish outside of probably wide receiver 2 range.
That's what I was going to say. So if they do get Julio, I agree. Wide receiver 2 at worst.
Yeah, probably.
The tight ends. There's been much to talk here for New England. Everybody was excited. I had on the Camps to Canton podcast with Colin Decker, who was hosting it, had me and Felix on right before free agency. And I actually, interestingly enough, called both of these tight ends landing there. Now, I wasn't sure both would actually go there. I was like, I think both are a great fit for the New England offense and what they like to do. Smith and Henry were both top tight end free agents. What do you expect from them, though, in New England? Hunter Henry last year with the Chargers, tight end 12, 60 receptions, 613 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Jonnu Smith, tight end 16, 41 receptions, 448 yards, 8 touchdowns. Did sit out a couple games due to injury. Dennis said that he expects both tight ends to be in tight end 10 to 18 range, with Jonnu being the higher of the two. I agree with that. I think McDaniels is not a good head coach, but I still believe he's a good offensive coordinator. I think he will use Jonnu the way we were hoping Tennessee would continue to use him. We saw them use him in ways at time in the rushing game and everything, but they only would do it seemed like a handful of times throughout the year. I think they will use Jonnu that way. I think he finishes higher over Hunter Henry. How do you have the tight end shaking out?
Yeah, instantly people were trying to say they're trying to reach back to when they drafted Gronkowski and Hernandez and having kind of the offense run through the tight ends and seeing what their receiving core is, seeing that they don't have a truly dominant running back. That makes some sense. It does seem like they spent money there. They're making it a focal point. Each of them got at least a 3-year contract. Henry got a 3-year deal, 4 years, 50 for Jonnu Smith. I don't think they're quite at that level. As much as you'd like to get excited about that potential, I don't see them finishing that. Heyday of Gronk and Hernandez was incredible. Rob Gronkowski was by far and away the best tight end in football for several years. I don't think either of these guys makes it. We've seen them both play for a couple of years. I tend to think they're both going to finish in the 12 to 16 range. I think Henry finishes slightly higher.
Interesting. Is that because touchdown catches? What do you think separates them?
No, I think Jonnu probably does better on touchdowns as he did in the past, but I think Henry ends up with more receptions, more yards.
All right. And like I was saying earlier, Cam Newton, when he had Greg Olsen was a stud for him. So if he does end up leaning on one of these guys, if he plays most of the season, and that is in Newton, I would not be surprised if one of these guys finishes even higher than I think Dennis said, tight end 10 to 18.
Yeah.
I mean, if Cam starts clicking with one of these guys, I could go as high as like 8 or 9. I really think that they could have a high end. Well, I guess it's not high end, low end tight end one.
And see, if they would have taken one free agent tight end,
Yeah.
I think they probably would have been a top 8 for me. But having both of them, I think they'll eat into each other a little bit.
All right, so that does it for the Patriots. On to everybody's new favorite team, the New York Jets. They finished 2-14 and in 4th place in 2020. Their key additions, they brought over wide receivers Corey Davis from the Titans and Keelan Cole from the Jags. Tevin Coleman, the running back, tight end Tyler Croft, the defensive end Carl Lawson, defensive tackle Sheldon Rankins, and linebacker Gerard Davis. Their key losses, they trade Sam Darnold to the Carolina Panthers. Joe Flacco goes to Philly. Saw some videos of elite Joe Flacco today throwing the ball with Zach Wilson, actually. And then they added Rashad Perriman, the wide receiver. Draft picks, they took Zach Wilson in the 1st round. Elijah Vera Tucker, the offensive guard in the 1st round, Elijah Moore, the wide receiver in the 2nd, and Michael Carter, the running back in the 4th round. Adam Gase is gone. Hallelujah. They bring in Robert Saleh. What should we expect from them in year 1?
I think they're going to be a lot more fun team to watch. It's interesting. If you would have probably told us a year ago that we were going to do a preview show on the Patriots and the Jets would be the team we were more excited to talk about, I would have told you were crazy, but that's just where it's gone. Patriots, a fine organization. I think they're going to be a more vanilla offense. I'm curious to see what this can do. Salah always had a lot of great intensity when he was in San Francisco. I think he's going to do some great things with the Jets defense. They're a little bit, to me, like the Jaguars. I don't think they're going to have an incredibly successful season this year in terms of wins, but they're going to be a heck of a lot of fun to watch. Probably the biggest question for me, people have been all over the board on Zach Wilson as a prospect, but I think he has some potential. I tend to agree with you. It's been a little bit unfair the way they've made fun of him being a little bit of a more quiet, laid-back guy. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but New York isn't the ideal place for that kind of a personality, and I think that's going to be a real test. We know New York fans, New York media, not exactly the most forgiving out there. There are probably worse places for a forgiving level of fans, maybe like a Philadelphia, but there's going to be a lot of pressure on Zach Wilson. There's a lot of expectation on Zach Wilson. They're kind of building all around him, and there's a lot of young pieces and everybody trying to learn. I think there's going to be a learning curve, and I just hope that he's given the time and the grace to see what he can do.
Yeah, I've talked about it before. Back when the Browns were searching for their head coach last year, and the final interviews were coming down to Salah and Kevin Stefanski, and those were my 2 favorite. I said if they cannot get Stefanski, it was somebody else too, and I think it was McDaniels, and everybody in Cleveland was wanting McDaniels, and I was standing on every hill yelling from every rooftop that I could, give us Stefanski or Salah, because I would have loved Salah with the defense that they had, and then the players that they've even added now onto this defense. I'm with you. I love him. I love the fire he showed on that 49ers sideline. And even more so the way the players talked about it. I mean, most players don't say bad or negative things about coaches to begin with, but just the passion and the love that those guys showed, the 49ers did when they talked about. So, I mean, even Richard Sherman today, who's not even really – he's not with the 49ers anymore, right? I'm not misremembering that.
He's a free agent still.
He even talks about how much he loves playing for Salah. So I think he's going to do great things there. I do like that Kyle Shanahan tree. We talked a little bit about, as I already mentioned, we recorded another podcast earlier. Matt LaFleur now being there as the offensive coordinator. He learned under Kyle Shanahan. We've seen what Mike LaFleur. I always mix those 2 up. I do it every time. Matt LaFleur. We've seen the offenses he's running in Green Bay, and it's been very interesting, I think, and effective. Granted, they have Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones, so take that for what it's worth. But I think the pieces that they're putting together in New York and the offense and Salah altogether, I think is going to be a lot of fun. You mentioned Zach Wilson kind of being the big question for you. What are your expectations or what are your thoughts on him for this year? Can he thrive in New York? You just mentioned the media part of it. I'm with you. I've been very I don't dislike Zach Wilson. I've been very open in the fact that I think he is a lower end prospect for me than the other guys, but I have really kind of come around on him with the way that other people have been talking about him and making fun of him. I've really kind of been like, you know what? I really want Zach Wilson to thrive because I want him to be able to shut all of these people up with the way that they make fun of him for how quiet and shy he's been.
And that's the thing. He's going to have to prove it on the field. They've built a good core of young weapons around him. I think it's a decent offensive scheme. But the Jets have a little bit of a long way to go. I expect he's going to have a decent season. I think when I was looking at the schedule, I believe it's week 16. We get to see the Jets versus the Jaguars. I'm really excited to see. Hopefully both he and Lawrence are going to be there at their peak, kind of get to see them play against each other. Week 1's going to be really fun. The Jets travel to Carolina. It's going to be a fascinating experience to see what Sam Darnold is out there trying to do with his new team while Wilson kind of begins his era with the Jets. I hope he can do well. Like I said, my one concern for him personally would be it seems from his personality style that that's the kind of player that we've seen big markets like New York abuse in the past. And I hope he's given a little bit of a chance and a little bit of grace. The fan base seems really excited about the franchise and the direction they're going. And so that gives me some hope.
So I would like to say thank you. Super Curly One commented on Twitch. We appreciate that. We don't get I don't know if you're one of there's always a couple that are always watching on Twitch, and I very much appreciate the love and the shout out. You know, I appreciate you comparing us to Serena and Venus. I don't know if I'd go that far. Maybe, you know, I'm trying to think of some like, you know, sports talk people I was trying to think of, you know, but I appreciate it. Oakland Raiders. You know, I'm interested to see what the Raiders will do this year. I think I was high on them last year. I actually had them making the playoffs, and they obviously kind of crumbled there toward the end. And then I'm sure Matt agrees with your last statement there that John Elway is the most underrated quarterback of all time.
I know, my favorite all-time Bronco.
All right, so let's get into the fantasy finishes and projections for the New York Jets. We talked a little bit there about Wilson and again, him being here with New York, but what do you expect out of him in year one? We saw, you know, Sam Darnold at times, and I think, in all honesty, they're very close, at least personality-wise. Sam Darnold was kind of that quiet guy there, and we saw the way the media kind of handled him. Do you think that affects his play at all on the field? What do you expect at him? Any shot at Rookie of the Year, or are you going to have him ranked for your quarterbacks in 2021?
I mean, I think he has a chance at Rookie of the Year. We talked about it kind of favoring quarterbacks in the past. It's really going to depend on what he puts up. I think they have a little bit of a younger set of weapons, and a difference between him and Trevor Lawrence is I don't know if I would say they have a dominant wide receiver one that you can count on. I also think they're going to be more of a little bit of a running offense. They might be a little bit more of a low scoring. We want to play defense, and which can be helpful with a younger quarterback to be a little conservative. I think he's going to be more of a mid to low QB2 this year.
Yeah, I think I've got him. So my dynasty rankings, I think moved him up a little bit. So my dynasty rankings, I moved him up to 14. Redraft, I haven't finished my redraft, but I'll probably have him right around the same. I think 14 to 15. I do like the weapons that they brought in. I do think they're clearly trying to help build around him and give him as much talent as possible to help his game out. I'm with you. Hopefully they kind of slow build it and kind of work the offense, work at his skill set. You know, he did not play the best competition last year in college, but I don't think that's going to affect him that much. You know, we've seen guys like Carson Wentz, who came out of North Dakota, come in and do great things their rookie season. So I don't want to use that competition thing as a thing that he can't succeed, but I'll be interested to see what they do with that offense and if they're able to, with the weapons they have around him, kind of help him succeed. But again, mid-range quarterback 2 is kind of where I'm leaning for him as well. The running backs added Coleman. They drafted Carter. They still have P. Ryan there, and they added the veteran Ty Johnson. That's all for you, Dennis. Who leads the backfield, and what is their fantasy value? P. Ryan finishes RB78 in just 10 games last year, 64 carries, 232 yards, 2 touchdowns, 11 receptions for 63 yards. Dennis said P. Ryan is his sleeper to lead the backfield, could also be fourth on the depth chart. He believes that P. Ryan is the forgotten man with the signing of Cole and the drafting of Carter. Cheap, low-risk flyer at this point.
Yeah, Piran's probably the biggest question mark. I think Tevin Coleman we both saw as kind of the veteran who he played with LaFleur both in Atlanta and in San Francisco, knows the system, has upside. It's interesting to me that all three of those guys seem a little bit similar in that they are decent runners and also are a little bit of pass catchers. So it'd be hard to pigeonhole anybody into a certain role. But to me, that is a little bit what we've seen with San Francisco the last few years. They have a committee of running backs who can all do it. So that when you have injuries or guys that go out, you can easily step up and replace them. I mean, we've seen them go 4 and 5 deep in San Francisco. That makes a little bit of sense. My initial impression was that I thought Coleman would be a guy they're leaning on at the beginning of the season, and he's going to end up splitting with somebody. I loved Carter going into the draft. I liked him more than you did. There's just something about him. I loved the landing spot and the potential. And I would agree with Dennis that he's probably being overdrafted in rookie drafts right now, especially with how shallow the position of running back is. And so should he be going the mid to late first round? Probably not. Have I personally taken him there? You bet your sweet butt I have, in places where I'm desperate for a running back. I think Carter ends up being the leading rusher. I think Coleman ends up second. I want to believe in P. Ryan. I just don't.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't taken Carter. I took him in one. It was a rookie depleted draft because it's a Devy pick. Yeah. So like the picks that were available, like Carter was like literally the third best player on the board, and I took him at like the 6th pick in the first round. I had 2 first-round picks, so. But you could also say the same thing. A lot of people are overdrafting Trey Sermon because of where he landed as well. So, but I think a lot of that speaks to what these guys have done. They truly build around the running backs and make these offenses good for all running backs. I'm with you. I think Carter is going to end up being the better one because while I do agree all three are exact same, and they probably brought in Coleman because he knows the system, I feel like Carter is just a tad bit better than both of them. I mean, Coleman has struggled with injuries, has not been consistent. I will say that I would flip the other two. I think P. Ryan is going to end up being the second guy because I just don't trust Coleman to stay healthy, and that's really the only reason why. I think Coleman is going to be assuming health as the game one kicks off the starter because he knows the system. I think he's going to have that step up on Carter and P. Ryan. But I do think eventually he's going to get hurt, and because of what Carter and P. Ryan do, I don't think they give the job back to Coleman. I also think Carter's a better pass catcher than the other two overall, which I think could help out Zach Wilson a lot as well. He had a running back at BYU, Tyler Algier, who's a really good pass catcher as well. He thrived with him at BYU last year, and if they can implement any kind of those games or those plays into their game plan using Michael Carter there as the running back instead of Coleman or P. Ryan. I think he could be really good, especially what we saw with Algier out of BYU. My phone just completely decided to close out of the sheet there. We are about to talk about the wide receivers. So
wide receivers that they bring back, Jamison Crowder was wide receiver 39 last year, 59 receptions, 699 yards, 6 TDs. Denzel Mims, who was a second-round pick, I believe, last year, finished his wide receiver 106, limited to 8 games because of injury, had 23 receptions for 357 yards. Dennis said about Crowder, he's not sold he makes the team. Will kind of depend on how Elijah Moore looks, whether he gets cut. Also wouldn't be surprised to see Crowder go to New England and be a takeover for Edelman. For Mims, he said, I love the talent. Will struggle with efficiency, but wide receiver 4 is within reach. The Jets also made big moves this offseason. They signed Corey Davis, who had 92 targets, 65 receptions last year for the Titans, and they drafted Elijah Moore.
Yeah, so Crowder, how do you feel about him? Because he has been the talk of the town. Really. It seems like everybody is on board of him likely being cut before the season starts. Do you expect that to happen as well?
I think it's going to depend on what Mims is looking like in development and what Moore is looking like in development, because you have to remember Elijah Moore, rookie. Corey Davis is a veteran with experience that they gave plenty of money, but he's also a guy who's adjusting to a new system and a new team, and we've seen that take a little bit. Crowder was a pretty reliable, steady veteran and also a pretty reliable and steady security blanket. And if you have a young wide receiver, the reason everyone is hot that Crowder could be the one to go is it's only $1 million for them to release him, only $1 million cap hit, which, I'd love to have $1 million, but it's not a huge cap hit when you're talking about the NFL. They also have Keelan Cole somewhere deep down the depth chart that they could raise up. They have a couple of other guys who were kind of role players in there last year. I wouldn't shock me if they cut Crowder. It also wouldn't shock me if they keep him. He's probably a good veteran presence too. I expect Davis at some point to become the number one this year. I think they signed him for that. I think he's been emerging. I think this is going to be a good shot. Moore, I like probably the most for the future. I'm bummed about Mims. I loved the pick last year. I loved the potential. Didn't really come together last year, and now they've added so many other receivers. I just think that hurts his potential ceiling.
I think Mims could be helped bringing over Davis. I don't think Davis is a real true one, but I think that's what they want him to be, which could end up helping out Mims a little bit. I'm with you. I think obviously Moore is going to be the deciding factor in what they do with Crowder. If it really is only $1 million to cut him and let him go, I wouldn't be surprised if they do, because I think his salary is quite extensive.
Yeah,
it's up there, and they just brought in, again, Corey Davis and paid him a lot of money. I don't know if I don't think this defense is going to be horrible, but I do think that they'll pass a decent amount to keep at least someone relevant. How high do you think one of these wide receivers can go, and which one do you think it'll be?
I think it's going to be Corey Davis in the wide receiver 3 range, topping out. To answer your Crowder question, if they keep him, his base salary is $10 million plus a $1 million signing bonus. So it's a cap hit of $11.3 million. It's a $1 million cap hit to let him go.
Yeah, so it makes even more sense to let him go.
That's probably the argument right now, unless you thought he was going to be your best guy. I tended for 2021, I think it's going to be Davis in a wide receiver 3 range.
Yeah, I think it might end up being Davis as well. Especially, if he can continue the production he had last year with Tannehill and the Tennessee Titans, I do think that he could be good for this offense. I think really any of the Jets are a fantasy value right now. I can't imagine any of these guys are going that high in any of the drafts. Chris Herndon, go ahead.
No, I was just I was agreeing with you. Corey Davis was wide receiver 30 last year with the Titans. So I would say that's probably about right.
Close to it. Yeah. Chris Herndon is a guy that Dennis and myself have been hoping would break out for, it feels like the last at least 2 or 3 years now. Is this finally the year for Herndon to break out? Finishes tight end 33 last year, 31 receptions, 287 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Dennis does look like he's jumping off the train, though. Never mind. He says, are we doing this again? Yes, we are. Tight end 14 through 18. I think I might agree with that. I don't think there's any way he makes it to a top 12 tight end, but if you can get 13 through 18, there's no way he's being drafted early. I'm pretty sure everybody has bailed. Yep. There's only got to be 2 guys.
I pulled it up in PPR. He's currently going as tight end 35. That's his ADP, about 234 overall. To me, that makes him a fantastic value.
I agree.
I don't know if I go as high as 14, but even if you're talking about like tight end 16 to 20, which probably feels safer, I think he has potential, but they do have a lot of receivers. They have a lot of receiving running backs. The big knock was the best ability is availability, and he was available last year, and it didn't seem to make a difference. But the Jets' offense was so bad, I'm willing to discount that a little bit. I still think that he can finish, tight end 15 to 20. That's where Dennis asked a good question. Define the year top 10 or top 20. I think if he's in top 20, if he's a solid tight end too, you're coming back to getting closer to the hopes you had for him. And he might be somebody who could grow with a young quarterback, grow with the offense after a couple of kind of lost years.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the fact that you just said he's going as tight end 35 off the board, if he can get tight end 20 value, that's a massive steal. I mean, that's one of your last picks in a draft. I mean, yeah, I mean, we thought he was going to be so good last year. The joke, we there's two people who drafted him last year in our redraft league. That was which was always funny on Sleeper. So, yeah, I think at best you are probably right. Like, highest upside, I'm talking about like the perfect season, he probably finishes around tight end 15, but likely best chance scenario, he finishes around tight end 20. We'll see. I mean, look, Matt Bushman was really good at BYU with Zach Wilson until he got injured. I think, Zach Wilson did rely on those tight ends when he was in college. So if Herndon can go out there and stay healthy, it also seemed like Herndon was just in Gase's doghouse too. Like there was a lot of weird stuff that was going on with Herndon.
I feel like everyone was in Gase's doghouse, though. It might have just been
that's true.
Gase.
I think that's just a Gase thing. Yeah, he doesn't like anybody except for like the players that none of us care about. So,
and the Jets took an interesting rookie, undrafted free agent. They signed Kenny Yeboah at tight end. So I'll be curious.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah. I was looking. They still have Ryan Griffin, who feels like he was, and they signed Tyler Kroft from Buffalo. So I was remembering they kind of made tight end a little bit crowded. I still like Herndon's potential, but those are the kind of things that would be small red flags.
Yeah. All right, so that will do it. As Matt said, I believe last week, or maybe it was off air, the show would not make it to an hour because there wasn't much to talk about. He's right. We're at about 52 minutes, and I don't know that there's like 8 minutes.
Well, we did 10 minutes on the weather, so.
And that's true. Oh, God, that's even worse. I will say, hey, next Thursday, so we'll be back on Monday talking about.
It's got to be the NFC South, so it's going to be the Buccaneers and the Saints.
And then we will finish with the Panthers and why am I forgetting the last team? Falcons. There we go.
So we get to talk some Kyle Pitts next week.
Not only that, just double checking. Pretty sure my wife doesn't have anything set up in here. We might even be able to talk a little bit about Loki, which drops on Wednesday next week. I might have to watch it without her to do that, which might cause some issues, but we're then going to be going to Disney afterwards, so I can probably smooth that over. We'll see. I don't want to make any promises, but she does love the character of Loki, as do I. Tom Hiddleston is just amazing, an amazing actor. But Loki drops next week. Matt and myself usually talk about those shows, but then the week after I'll be in Disney, so maybe we'll try and squeeze the first episode in and talk about that on Thursday. But other than that, everybody enjoy your weekend. We will, again, be back on Monday to talk about the NFC South with Dennis on Monday, Matt and myself.